Wasabi guys, Void here, come back at y'all with another one of my favorite commander cards. This time we're going to be looking at a Planeswalker, something I haven't done yet. And one of my favorite ones is Elspeth, Sun's Champion. She is 6 mana, mono white for 4 loyalty. Her +1 allows you to put 3/1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. Her -3 is essentially a Smite the Monstrous, basically for all creatures. With power 4 or greater, they are destroyed. And her -7, her alt, is you get an emblem with creatures you control, get +2/+2, and have flying. The reason why I love her is that she is just great at stabilizing games. If you are behind, if you're playing tokens, she's perfect. If you're playing control and you need a way to pillow fort for yourself, she's pretty solid. Getting 3/1/1 tokens, that's unusual compared to so many of these other token producing planeswalkers out there that are usually around 4 mana. They get you 1 token. Well, she's 6 mana, she gets you 3/1/1 tokens. And that's all on a +2. That's not a minus, so you get pure value out of her as soon as you put her into play, getting you those 3/1/1 tokens. Her minus is also pretty solid as well. Very underrated aspect about her is that there's so many huge creature-based decks in this format, and a lot of them want to get out to huge starts and get these gigantic creatures out there, and being able to just shut them all down on a minus is pretty solid. So when you think about it, her plus and her minus are pretty good at protecting herself. She's very difficult to deal with when you consider that in a fair matchup, if you're just dealing with the average creature-based deck, they're not going to be able to deal with her pretty easily. And this is aside from the fact that planeswalkers are typically one of the better permanent types, because they're just not that much removal meant for planeswalkers. You typically have to rely on planeswalker-specific removal or cards such as Merciless Eviction that are capable of hitting planeswalkers, because there's just not that much out there to deal with it. You have to deal combat damage in order to lower the loyalty, or else you're just not going to be able to deal with it. So right there, she's pretty powerful. She's able to protect herself, and she's able to deal with immediate threats. Her alt pretty much is a win con. It was a win con in Standard, and in Commander it's not too much different. They're awesome creatures. Give them +2/+2 in flying, and you're likely capable of dealing with many problem creatures in this format. One of the easiest ways of giving evasion is to give creatures flying. It's one of the most common static abilities, and it's constantly showing up in sets. Very good in Standard, very good in Limited, and it's also pretty good in Commander. So obvious synergies here. You want to use doubling season effects. Obviously you can double her loyalty as soon as she enters the battlefield with a doubling season, but we also have Anointed Procession, which is on color, which is pretty good. So if you want to play a mono white token deck, you can definitely do that now with Anointed Procession and actually make it even better. You could also throw her into an Elish Norn deck, which is one of my favorite mono white commanders, because she has a built-in anthem for all your creatures, a +2/+2 one to be exact, and her ability to also lower your opponent's creatures and -2/-2 to them is also pretty solid as well. But yeah, putting her in a deck where you just load up on anthems and load up on token doublers is ideally what you want to do with her when it comes to building a token deck. But one of the cooler synergies, which is one I like to use, is with the commander option Teysa Orzhov Scion, because her activated ability requires you to sacrifice 3 white creatures, and conveniently enough, her plus gets you 3/1/1 white soldier creature tokens, which qualifies and allows you to exile a target creature with Teysa's ability. Pretty solid commander, and she just loves tokens in general, so Elspeth, Sun's Champion, tends to be a perfect fit in that deck. And one of the most obvious synergies here is with Atraxa Praetor's Voice. She's pretty much good with just about any planeswalker within her colors. However, with Elspeth, you get more creature production, which isn't always common among planeswalkers, and it's usually a big weakness to Super Friends, things like that, where you don't always have the best creatures. It's not always a good plan just to rely on Atraxa being on the field in order to defend your planeswalkers and their loyalty. So definitely having a board wipe on a minus doesn't hurt either. So if we just compare her to her other 2 versions, we have Elspeth Knight Errant from Shards of Alara, and we have Elspeth Tyrell from Scars of Mirrodin. Both versions, in my opinion, are significantly weaker than Sun's Champion. Knight Errant would be the only one that, in my opinion, could compete, because she has 2 pluses, and they're both pretty solid. Yeah, you just get 1/1/1 token. Doesn't really compete with the 3/1/1s, but again, sometimes you don't always need the tokens. You want some good abilities as well to your creatures, which is why she has the other plus. Gives a creature +3/+3 in flying until end of turn. Her alt, however, is pretty good. It's arguably better than Sun's Champion, which is the only other reason why I might consider putting her in a deck and not just Sun's Champion, is because the fact that her ult does make a lot of your permanents indestructible. Elspeth Tyrell, on the other hand, is significantly weaker because honestly her plus and her minus should have been switched. Yeah, gaining a ton of life off of the number of your creatures isn't terrible, but in a practical sense it's not always great just to gain life, You would rather just get tokens out there. They're going to help you stabilize a lot better than just gaining life. Being able to block and prevent damage altogether is better than just gaining life. Her ult, however, is obviously meant for token-based decks, whereas Sun's Champion isn't just for token-based decks. She obviously is capable of shining pretty well in those token-based decks, but she is not just for token decks. What I really like her in is Oloro, Ageless Ascetic, and similar control decks that play white, for the main reason because you're not as dependent on powerful creatures for your setup. You're not as dependent on powerful creatures to finish games, so you obviously want to have a good control aspect in Planeswalkers, especially ones like Elspeth are capable of providing you that extra bit of control with her minus. In a deck where you're likely going to be outnumbered and outpressured when it comes to creatures, you want a Planeswalker that's capable of shutting them down while also helping you stabilize with some token production of her own. And her ult is also a pretty good win con in addition to using her plus repeatedly, so she's definitely a big help to those control decks that can get behind in the early game. Elspeth is a good stabilizer. Now, Ugin or Karn Liberated, no, definitely not. They're colorless, they obviously fit into way more decks. However, when it comes to just Planeswalkers being able to see play in multiple different decks, I honestly would have to say Elspeth is one of the best Planeswalkers in the Commander format when it comes to seeing play in just so many different deck types. We have powerful Planeswalkers such as Venser the Sojourner. Venser is pretty good in Flicker strategies as well as Super Friend strategies. I mean, most Planeswalkers tend to be good in Super Friend strategies anyway, so I don't really use that as an argument to say one's better than the other. But when it comes to fitting into multiple different deck types, Venser is pretty much just going to be in either Super Friends or Flicker decks. That's really where he's good at. And Tezzeret the Seeker is usually just good in Artifacts and Super Friends decks. So you don't really have as much flexibility with those two Planeswalkers. They're very specific. Not to say that their impact isn't just as powerful in those decks as Elspeth could be, but the options of decks that you have in terms of playing Elspeth Sun's Champion, you can put her into so many decks. You could put her into creature-based decks just to add some more support. You could put her into heavy Anthem decks, heavy token decks. You could put her into control decks. You could put her into Super Friends. You can put her into just so many of these different decks, and that's not always the case when it comes to Planeswalkers. They're very specific. They have a certain synergy, whether it's life gain. You have Tyrell, which is just typically good with token-based decks, but the fact that her minus is a board wipe, her plus is token generation, her minus is an Anthem, I mean, they just work very well. You have an incentive to keep plussing her, which you don't always have. You have some Planeswalkers whose ults are just very good, but their pluses are just unbearable and usually not worth repeatedly going after turn just to get to the ult eventually. That's not always worth it, but with her plus is definitely worth it on its own. So what you get is just a good value white Planeswalker, usually one of the first Planeswalkers I think of whenever I do play white. Just overall, very good at stabilizing, very good at coming back, winning games, grinding games out. Just a very effective Planeswalker. So anyway guys, that was my favorite Commander card this week. Very awesome Planeswalker. I might have to do some more Planeswalkers in the future as well as Commander options. I definitely like going after them. There's so many different awesome options when it comes to this game, this format, and I want to share my experience with cards. Definitely why I think cards are good. I want to make more videos like these, so if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I do a ton of other awesome videos like these. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off.